Welcome back to the Bourbon Lens with Jake. Scott is sick, unfortunately, and we have traveled to Lawrenceburg, Kentucky to go to Wild Turkey. And to be honest, my first time here. I didn't tell our guests that yet, but we're excited to dive into all things Wild Turkey and discuss the recent release of Generations and what is on the horizon for the brand in 2024. So sit back and buckle in and listen to our newest episode featuring Bruce Russell of Wild Turkey. Bruce, how are you this cold morning right before Christmas?
I'm doing well. I didn't know this was your first time.
Yeah, first time.
So welcome to Tyrone. That's what we're actually at. You know, it says Lawrenceburg, Kentucky on our bottles, and also the Four Roses bottles are across town, but neither of us are actually in Lawrenceburg.
That's funny.
We're in Tyrone.
Well, okay. So we're learning some new stuff here. We're in Tyrone, and it is literally a distillery and a ton of rick houses. And is there much else in Tyrone?
There is. There's a big booming community right there on the river. A few hundred people live down there. A few families.
Yeah.
Shouts out to the Beasley family that lives down there. We're actually related through my granny. And I actually grew up going to church down there at the little Tyrone Baptist Church. That's about it, though. Not much, you know. It was a big booming town at one time.
Yeah.
That's where the original distillery operation started in the mid 1800s.
Okay. And
it was a big little river community, but it's a nice little, what people in Kentucky would call a holler now. You know?
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with a holler.
No.
So how far was that to where we are today?
I mean, just 250 feet straight down towards the river.
Okay.
We sit kind of up at the top of the hill.
Yeah.
When the Rippies came over from Ireland and started, they would have been down there on the river. And then probably in, I think it was the 1880s, right around 1880, because they built that train trestle, I think, in like 81, something like that. They moved up the hill, bought the distillery that was sitting up here.
Gotcha.
Built onto the distillery operation, built that train trestle, and then built warehouse A and B. If you come do barrel picks here, we still do the picks in A, which is the oldest rick house we've still got.
Oh, wow. And how old is that rick house?
1894.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Been around almost as long as Jimmy.
Yeah. So, you know, speaking of Jimmy and Eddie and the whole crew, right, that is makes up the Wild Turkey family. What's it like to kind of be around, you know, I'll say titans in the industry? And then you shared a little bit about this at the Generations dinner that you all had about kind of being in that, you know, that family, but not always kind of like you're poking your head in and out and then finally jumping in. What's that like to be amongst them and then finally, you know, come to work with them on a daily basis?
Well, I think I mentioned this at the Generations thing. Being Jimmy's grandson's a big deal in Lawrenceburg, not as much because of the whiskey, but because I'm from a small town in Kentucky. So if anybody's from a small American town, you probably know like high school sports or accolades when you're a kid. That's way more important. So
yeah.
Jimmy was this like all-world athlete. So being his grandkid here, it was a big deal because they expected you to be the best at all the sports. You know, his jersey is still hung up in the rafters at the high school. He owns still a bunch of records.
What position did he play?
He played quarterback in football.
Okay.
I think he played a guard in basketball, maybe a shooting guard type.
Yeah.
And then he, I think, pitched and maybe played infield in baseball.
Okay. He did it all.
He ran track. He was a tremendous track athlete. We make fun of him here. Me and Mark, a buddy of mine that I went to high school with, who works here. That's the best part about this distillery is most of these people are local, and I grew up around them, but. We always laugh. Jimmy still holds record for a 100-yard dash. He's so old. They still ran 100 yards. And the only reason it's never been beat is because they went to 100 meters like right after he graduated high school.
That's funny. That's funny. I'm trying to like picture like 1950s, like Jimmy running around in those short shorts like you've seen.
Had the short shorts. He didn't weigh probably $150.
Yeah.
Soaking wet. He was a thin guy, not little. He's about 6 feet tall, but built a lot different than he is now. He didn't have as much bourbon in his belly, I guess. Yeah,
true. You know, obviously Jimmy's kind of like in the community, everybody knows Jimmy, and then obviously your dad kind of steps into the business, and now you're here. What's it like to really kind of just take all of this in and start to blend and be a part of the whole whiskey making process?
I mean, it's a dream come true for me. Growing up, I didn't really want to do this for a living. I wanted to do other things. Actually, when I first went to school, I was had aspirations to be like a robotics engineer.
Okay.
However, things change. I started doing a summer job here in 2010 and then kind of just never left. The best part of my job is actually getting to work with Dad and Mimi and the people here because, you know, the Russell family, there's not that many of us, but the Wild Turkey family, you know, there's 300 or so of us here at the distillery.
Yeah.
Even just sitting in here watching some of the folks walk by, getting their morning coffees and stuff like that. Now, not everybody's here because some people are already gone on Christmas vacation, but, you know, seeing people that I've known for decades that are still coming into work every day here and help run the place. But the best part of my job is it's allowed me the opportunity to get to know my dad and my granddad in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise. They're pretty quiet at home.
Yeah.
You had mentioned like getting to talk to them at generations, like how they're the type of people that seem like they could just talk to a fly on the wall. They're not that way. When I was growing up, they weren't that way.
Yeah.
And so getting to come here and see their passion for what we do, see their ability to make whiskey, to help run a plant, to engage with our customers and the people in this industry. I didn't know any of that stuff was there.
Yeah.
I grew up coming here.
Yeah.
But when I was around, it was always still kind of family stuff, you know? So I was probably getting in trouble and getting yelled at, or I was begging Jimmy for dollars so I could stick them in the vending machine here and get Yoo-Hoo chocolate drink out of the Union vending machines and stuff like that. But I didn't really know them in a way like I do now. And that's the best part of my job.
Yeah. I mean, like that's so true. Like I used to go on road trips with my dad and he was a salesperson and I would like see him do all this stuff. And then I'm like at home, like you just kind of like to hang out. Like you do like to talk, but you're pretty low key. And so like getting to experience. And then like, as I got older, I worked with him a little bit as a worker while he was a salesperson. So, I mean, I understand that dynamic and those are the people you look up to, right? Like those, like they're examples, obviously leaders in the community. I can definitely relate in a way that makes that story kind of ring true. And so as you've come into your own, right, you've worked your way up from tour guide to brand ambassador now into the blending role. Like what's your day-to-day kind of look like for Wild Turkey?
So I have, when you're a Russell, I think especially you have a number of different jobs that most people in my role probably wouldn't have. So part of it is still helping rep the brand. Yeah. Sometimes it's more direct helping like sales. So sometimes it's talking directly to customers with our Campari folks and trying to get somebody to bring your product in, whether it be at a big old national account chain or a little small local store, depending on where it's at. Yeah. Part of it is still in marketing. You know, I sit in a lot of marketing meetings trying to give my opinion or advice to our marketing folks who are great. It's one of the best things about the way our company works is they are very open to hearing what we have to say. And it's hard for people to understand the culture of our industry if they've not been in it before, especially the bourbon industry here in Kentucky. Yeah. They don't understand how close-knit it all is. That like, you know, in a lot of industries, you might market or sell your product by talking the other products down. Like we don't like doing that, right? No. Everybody needs to be positive about each other here in Kentucky. So that's part of it is helping them get our marketing messages out there in a way that's going to be good for our fans and that we feel good with. Yeah. Part of it's the private barrel program for the past, since 2019, if you've come and picked a barrel in person, unless I've been sick, hurt, or out of town, it's been me. Yeah. And, you know, that takes up probably 50% of my time is doing in-person picks. And then my favorite part of the job is being in the lab. Yeah. And it's one of those things that I think I got a lot from Jimmy. Jimmy still tries to learn something all the time. You know, he wants to know rumors and news and who's building what distillery and who's getting their whiskey from who and that kind of stuff. He wants to know what's going on. And I've kind of got the same thing, although it's easier for me to keep up with it because all my buddies are in the whiskey industry just about. But for me, it's being in that lab and learning the more technical side of things, trying to wrap my head around a lot of the high-level chemistry, a lot of the actual production methods that we're using, not on the distillation or maturation side, because that's what I've grown up around, but more on the processing side of things.
Yeah.
And then getting to taste whiskey and blend it together. That's, that's what my title would indicate I'm doing every day. I wish I was blending a new whiskey together every day. It'd be pretty fun, but we don't have that many products.
Yeah, for sure.
And the big ones take care of themselves, but that's probably my favorite part is working in our lab. We've got a guy here named Josh Call, who's one of the heads of our product development here at Wild Turkey, young guy about my age, and we love sitting in the lab and trying to come up with ideas and get to taste awesome liquid and sometimes not awesome liquid and try to figure out what to do with it,
Yeah.
That's the most fun part of the job.
For sure. I think one of the things what's interesting, right, is you did grow up around the distillation side. Like you probably watched your dad pull levers before everything got automated. You watched Jimmy do it. You kind of got an eye. Now it's all probably computerized to an extent, right, in modernization. But like learning that lab piece, right, that's really hard. And especially trying to differentiate a lot of things when you're only working with two mash bills, right? You have a rye mash bill and a bourbon mash bill, if I'm not mistaken. There's not anything other than that, right?
No, that's it. We've got our traditional bourbon mash bill that we've had since before Jimmy started.
Yeah.
It was probably the original Rippy mash bill, or one of them, because they were making a number of products. The rye mash bill is a little bit younger.
Yeah.
I think Jimmy actually started making we sourced our rye here for a while from Pennsylvania, Maryland.
Yeah.
All the way until the 70s. And then Jimmy did what a lot of Kentucky guys did. He tried to make it as similar to bourbon as possible.
Yeah.
You have to be 51% or more rye in your recipe. We're right there.
Yeah.
So, but he's been doing this, for a really long time. And I grew up around watching Dad and Jimmy do it. We were really the last major distillery to go to automation in 2010.
Yeah.
And so, when I was a kid, Steve Higgins, who still runs our still today on first shift, who's been here, Lord, I think he's worked here for like 50-ish years in the union.
Wow.
He was doing the same thing when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Working the still, and seeing those type of people, pull levers, turn valves, open and close the grain chutes, intaking the grain. It's a lot of the same people, and you grow up around it, you don't realize what you know.
Yeah.
Until when I started giving tours, and I would give little tidbits of information here, and somebody would ask something and I'd be able to answer right away. And our tour guides would be like, how'd you know the moisture content in the grain? Or how'd you know, what proof we're pulling off this plate of the still or whatever? It's like, I don't know. Jimmy said that. You just kind of grow up around it. You don't realize.
Yeah. You kind of osmosis. So like, as you kind of got into like the lab piece, like, what do you think the biggest thing you've learned, like from understanding the science and the makeup of what makes whiskey? Like, what's been the one thing that's kind of stuck out to you that you think people would be interested in here?
I think that the really cool thing is we still don't really understand the barrel part of it. And what I mean by that is there is good hard science. Bourbon's pretty simple, actually.
Yeah.
When you break it down, you're making beer, and then you're distilling beer, and then you're sticking it into a barrel, and you're just waiting until it tastes good.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the thing that's really cool to me is, we've got teams of chemists and biochemists and product development folks that work on the food science part of it. We all know, me and Dad and Jimmy included, why the flavors develop in a barrel. I could tell you what a barrel can impart and what is likely to happen. But why? And we know the variations of what goes on barrel to barrel. But the fact that two whiskeys still sit side by side of each other, the same exact distillate put in on the same exact day, in supposedly the same barrel from IC, that's where we get our barrels, they'll taste completely different.
Yeah.
And we don't really understand that part. There's still a little bit of magic, I guess you could say, in the process. And that is the coolest part to me. I thought, I'll get in here and I'll learn some of the hard science behind it. Everything will make sense. Well, I understand better now.
Yeah.
Why certain things happen, why certain flavors develop, why Jimmy likes 6 to 12-year-old whiskey and why Dad likes 15-ish-year-old whiskey. There's reasons for that.
Yeah.
But why Camp Nelson tastes so much better than almost everything else on average right now?
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah.
Thank God it happened, because that stuff's awesome. I mean, it's what we used as the base for generations. But we don't know exactly why that is. We have ideas. Yeah. And that's the coolest part to me is at the end of the day, you could meet somebody, like we were talking about Pat over at Wilderness Trail earlier, who's our sister distillery now in Campari. Well, Pat's as sharp as anybody in the industry. I mean, he's a doctor at this stuff.
Literally.
Literally. He's a doctor. And, you know, he could tell you the chemistry behind this whole process, but he'll tell you as much as anybody. He's got a whole warehouse full of barrels and not a single one of them will taste the same.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the most fun part of the job.
Yeah. And then when you're putting together like projects like Generations, right, you get to experience what people like you mentioned, 6 to 12 or 15-year-old or wherever you kind of fit in for that profile. And you get to find the best ones of those allotted things and the flavors and aromas that y'all are looking for. So speaking of, right, like walk us through that process on what it was like to build Generations and whose idea was that to kind of build a product like that?
Well, the liquid, we actually just found some really good liquid, and that's usually how it starts.
Yeah.
Thankfully, you know, different companies work in different ways. Most of the time for us, we find something really cool or somebody comes up with a cool idea and we run with it, and it eventually turns out in the marketing and bottling and all that piece comes after we find the good liquid.
Yeah.
For this, we had found some good liquid, and I don't take credit for the name or any of that kind of stuff, but I do take credit for getting Jimmy involved. So all three of us.
Yeah.
Because, you know, Dad and Jimmy, they don't make a lot of whiskey together as far as blending their styles together because their styles are so drastically different.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of what makes Wild Turkey special right now. We do only have one mash bill for all the bourbon, but worldwide we're putting out dozens of bourbons.
Yeah.
Between all our products, and some of them are Jimmy whiskeys to me, some of them are Eddie whiskeys, and those have a different flavor profile. And I think that's what's so neat about our portfolio is we have all these different things that taste very different, all coming from one thing. I selfishly wanted to do something with Jimmy, and Dad was like, you know what? That's an awesome idea. We didn't really understand how we were going to get him involved.
Yeah.
And then I actually think Josh over there in product development probably helped. If I'm remembering right, we were sitting in the lab. He's the one that kind of suggested that why don't you all just pick your own favorite whiskeys independently from each other,
mm-hmm.
and then we'll figure it out at the end, which is actually a lot harder than what we normally do.
Yeah.
Normally we're in the lab and the product development team and me and Dad are in there and we're trying whiskeys and we're all trying to agree, okay, these whiskeys are the best and they'll work best together.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit easier to blend than when you pick drastically different whiskeys and then try to make it work.
Yeah.
So me and Dad knew exactly where we were going. We were going to Camp Nelson. And we each found some whiskey that we really liked. And the thing about Jimmy is he's still as sharp as ever.
Mm-hmm.
He still remembers people. He still tells stories. Now, the information he's telling you might be from 1997.
Yeah.
But he still remembers what we're doing here, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
He just doesn't like the automation, so he remembers the old way of doing it. But,
so a Jimmy tour would be completely different than a tour that was given today.
Absolutely. He'd probably tell you some stuff he's not even supposed to tell you anymore. But he can't walk around the warehouses. He physically just can't get around that easy. And so me and Dad we're going to have to go into these warehouses. And so we go to pick liquid. And I found some 12 and 14 that I really liked out in Camp Nelson. Dad found some 14 and 15. We kind of knew where we were both going to go. And we actually ended up picking the same 14, which is why that became kind of the primary part of the blend.
Yeah.
The 12-year-old I found was big. It was spicy. On the bourbon side of things, I'd actually trend way more towards Jimmy's flavor profile. Big, in your face, spicy, high proof, sweet, but a dark sweetness. A lot of people talk about those old Wild Turkeys having kind of a chocolate covered cherry or a lot of sweet tobacco. And like Jimmy's two favorite things when I was growing up was a big old slice of chocolate cake or something and then chewing tobacco. So it makes sense. His whiskey tastes the same way that his food and his tobacco did. And for Dad, he likes more subtle, soft. He's Russell's 10 and me and Jimmy are a rare breed, you know?
Yeah.
So Dad found this 15 that was a little bit more, I think he calls it refined. He just likes stuff where the edges have been rounded off. Yeah. Where me and Jimmy like a little edge.
Yep.
And then I knew Jimmy wasn't going to like any of the whiskey. I actually tried to get him to try that 12-year-old that I had.
Yeah.
Said too old. And that's about what he'll give you. Too old, good, no, you know.
Yeah.
And so we had a allotment of different, and I think it might have been 8, almost 9 by the time he tried his stuff that he liked. He was like, yeah, this is pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, if he says it's pretty good, that's as good as you're going to get. So we took some of his whiskey. It ended up being like 9.5, I think. We did the final blend. So it's a blend of 4 different ages. His was 9, mine was 12, and Dad's was 15. And then both of us fought over that 14. So that ended up being the primary part of the blend. And me and Dad are both taking credit. And I think you see some parts of Dad. I think it starts off like an Eddie whiskey. Even though it's 121 proof, it doesn't taste 121 proof right up front.
Yeah.
Where I think if it was me, you'd tell it's 121 proof. It's higher proof. That's my thing. I mean, we were talking earlier, we're closer to the same age than I am with Dad or Jimmy.
Yeah.
And I've been lucky enough to grow up in this whiskey industry since I was of drinking age. Of the bourbon boom already had happened and was happening, and people were doing higher age stamps and higher proofs and giving the bourbon nerds of the world more kind of unique stuff.
Yep.
And so I really enjoy stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Jimmy's flavor profile's in there. It's got those deep, dark fruit notes.
Yep.
It's got a little bit of that barrel that he likes. It's got a lot of clove.
Mm-hmm.
That's like the one note I probably most associate with Jimmy's whiskey myself from the 70s and 80s. That people call it the Wild Turkey kick or Wild Turkey spice. And a lot of people would talk about it being rye, where if you look at our mash bill, we're not that high in rye, but we do get a lot of that kind of classic spice.
Yeah.
And to me, it's almost a clove. And there's a lot of that in that whiskey. And I think it's very unique, really cool. It's probably the coolest thing I've ever got to do in my whole career. And I've got to do some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
Being Eddie's kid, Jimmy's grandkid has afforded me a lot of cool things. And but this bottle, to be honest, I was pretty sure me and Dad would be on a bottle. We've worked on stuff since.
Yeah.
Cornerstone. Really, I had helped pick out those barrels, and I wasn't involved in the blending at that time.
Yeah.
But I've worked with him on a lot of things, like Russell's 13 or Rare Breed Rye, a couple of the last 2 Master's Keeps. But this was something that was going to have my name on it. And that was really cool to me.
Yeah.
But to have my name on there with Jimmy,
yeah,
that's something I never thought I'd get to do, to be honest.
For sure.
Who in the right mind when you're a kid thinks your granddad's going to be almost 90 years old still coming to work?
No kidding.
It's insane.
It is.
And he does. He was at work last week, the week before, this week. He won't be at work tomorrow because my family starts coming in.
Yeah.
We're going to have our Christmas at his house on Saturday.
Nice.
That's a big thing. We always go to his house for Christmas. He has no clue what my granny gets us.
Nice.
He gets real mad because she always spends too much money, he says. And then he always gets her something super nice.
Yeah. That's
and then we make him open up his presents last. My granny's actually 3 years older than him.
Oh, yeah?
And the way my family does it, we open up the Christmas presents, youngest to oldest.
Okay.
And everybody has to sit and watch every other person open up their presents.
I like that.
Now, the little kids, they don't. They run the other room and try to get me or Dad or my brother, somebody to build the toys for them,
Yeah, yeah.
But even though Granny's older, she opens before Jimmy does. So it goes by age until it gets to Granny and Mimi, and then at the end, Mimi opens up his.
Oh man, that's awesome because I got to see them interact at the Generations Dinner too. Like it was really cool just to watch the whole family dynamic. Joan was also there.
Oh yeah,
and just seeing how the family got together because you all like the food was those family type of meals that you all would have, and so it felt like we were having a Russell's family dinner. Like that's what it felt like. And you talked about the bourbon industry in there. Like it was the who's who of bourbon and whiskey because you talked about the close knitness of this, and I'll bring it all back here in a second. But that was the other thing that the Generations unveiling and the tasting and that event brought out everyone because it was like, not only are these people being celebrated, but like we're going to celebrate them as a community. Right. And I think that's what brings Kentucky bourbon like to a whole nother level is the community is off the charts. And to celebrate that and to be a part of that, I felt like was one of the coolest things me and Scott ever got to do was to be in that room and watch the interactions. And then I'll be honest, the whiskey was great. Like it reminded me, it came out like right around, I think it was right before Thanksgiving. And it kind of reminded me of like something I would want to have like with my turkey and then again with my pumpkin pie. Like, because it had all of those notes. That's what it reminded me of. I was like, man, can we carve a turkey now? Like, well, and we already had like fettuccine and broccoli and chicken, and we had all types of stuff. Like the food was phenomenal at Barn 8 there. But I thought the whiskey was excellent. And now it is something me and you were talking about before this. It's hard for me to not say it tops the Master Keep 17 bottled and bond. I think that's just special to me. I think it's just an amazing whiskey that you all created. But Generation is close second. Like it's really damn good, and I feel like that's something you should be proud of. But also, like I can hear your passion in that you are thankful that you got to work with your granddad and your dad, and like now it's a legacy. Your name's on a bottle with them. Like that's pretty damn cool.
Yeah, it's super special. I hope I'm gonna drag Jimmy into a couple more things if I can.
Yeah,
we'll see. I will say he is much more in line with my flavor profile than he was with Dad's, so it's a little bit easier for me, I think.
Yeah.
And of course, me and Dad, we've got a million things in the works, you know.
Yeah.
And that's something I feel very lucky is. I think it's a difference in era. It's a difference in the way that people raise their kids, maybe.
Yep.
Jimmy was tough on Dad. Tough love, you know. Get down, start from the bottom up, learn it yourself. That was always his kind of thing he told Dad. Get down in there and figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not really what they've done for me, and I feel very lucky. They've kind of held my hand. And not just them, everybody here at the distillery has kind of held my hand as I've kind of grown up in the industry, even from a kid even.
Yeah.
But once they realized, okay, you're going to probably stick around, you've got the passion.
Yeah.
It was, you know, every door's open to you. We'll teach you, you know, if you mess up, it's not that big of a deal. We'll work on the next thing. And it just made it so easy for me. I do want to touch about the family thing, though. That event was really special for us and me particularly because I grew up in this industry. I've been to just about every event, and it was really cool. It's probably the first time most of my family's been to an event. Now, not all my family. My brother couldn't find somebody to babysit his kids because all his babysitters were at the event.
Yeah.
And he's a football coach, so he wasn't going to be able to make it from over in Campbellsville. But most of my family was there, and to see Joanne's mom and dad and her brothers be there with their wives and kids, and Joanne's my cousin. That's our national ambassador, lives up in New York. Shouts out to Joanne. And my mom was there. She never comes to anything.
Yeah.
To have our adopted cousin Benny, who's our other brand ambassador out in California, who's part of my family now.
Yeah.
To have, you know, Fred and Freddie there from Beam, and a bunch of old heads that, Lord, I hadn't seen some of them since I was a kid. Some of them I still see around. You know, Jim Rutledge is still active and making whiskey, but some of those guys from some of those old distilleries I hadn't seen since I was a kid, and to have everybody there was super special.
Well, one of the things I thought was interesting, I was sitting next to Susan Riegler, who knows everyone, and Susan was like, "You know that guy?" And I was like, "I don't know who it is," and I forget his name, but he was the last master distiller at Stitzel-Weller.
Oh yeah.
She's like,
Ed, yeah.
Ed doesn't come to anything. Like for Ed to be here, that's a big deal. And I was like, and then they all started fawning over like going and talking to Ed. And I was like, well, this is pretty cool. Like I'm gonna let the man have his dinner, but like I thought like even people that obviously Stitzel-Weller is one of the most regarded whiskey companies historically, right? Like it's pretty cool that he even showed up to pay honor and be a part of that family, because I'm sure they all know each other. Your dad and your granddad probably know Ed like he's just a good old boy.
But yeah, I mean, Dad, I think looks at him like I do some of Dad's friends, but I mean, Jimmy does know everybody. He's been around forever, and it's still one of those things I'll hear. Like one of the old leaders of the KDA was there,
yeah,
who I'd probably not seen since I was a kid, and got to meet him as an adult for the first time, and to have him come up to me and tell me stories about him and Jimmy going to the government, I think in the 80s, and convincing that alcohol evaporating out of barrels was not a environmental pollutant. I was like, what? Jimmy was like in Congress, like telling them like I didn't know he did all this stuff. And you meet these people that knew Jimmy in an era where I wasn't even alive.
Yeah.
Not even thought of. And to hear all these cool stories about things he's done and the people he's met, that stuff's really cool to me. And to see some of those people, and then to see Jimmy get torn up, it's not often that I've seen Jimmy be emotional like that, like he was at that dinner, whether it was Dad talking or Fred No talking about Jimmy, who Jimmy holds very dear. Me, or I think the thing that tore him up most is the KDA announced they were going to name their headquarters the Russell House and have that little picture of Mimi and Granny Joe up there. It was super special.
Yeah, like I that was a moment I think like I got the feels, like, because it was like not only is he recognized by what he's done here in Lawrenceburg and at the distillery, but like globally in Kentucky. Like that sounds weird, but like the global brand bourbon ambassador that he is, like if people know bourbon, they know Jimmy Russell. And that's pretty damn cool.
Yeah, there's been a lot of places that I thought I was the cool guy, you know, because I would know a restaurant owner or a chef or a bar owner or bartender that was, you know, famous in New York or LA, San Francisco, wherever, Chicago. And I'd walk in and everybody would explode, Jimmy. And I'd be like, how do they know you? And Jimmy's like, well, I started coming here in 1984. And, you know, I hear all these stories about Jimmy running wild, you know, having a good old time in these cities back when he was younger. And it's really cool to get to see that part of his life and get to meet people that knew a different Jimmy than I do.
No, that's pretty cool. And so if you can find a bottle, good luck. It's an exceptional whiskey. And I think this is one that you should try. If you're a Wild Turkey fan, find a pour of it or grab a bottle. I think you'd be in for a treat. But that's the old, right? Now we got to look forward to 2024. There's probably a swath of projects in the making, you know, but if there was one thing that you can talk about, right? Like never want to press a brand to say something that's secretive, but like if something you could talk about, what's happening in 2024 that you're most looking forward to?
I mean, I will touch on one thing in particular, but you know, it's the bourbon industry. We do have to file TTB label approvals and legal stuff. So there's no secrets for the whiskey nerds anymore. They know stuff before I do sometimes.
Just go follow Coming Whiskey on Instagram.
Yeah, there you go.
Jacob Kuiper will get you right.
We've got a lot of cool stuff. If you know what's coming next year, you'll be super excited. If you don't, just wait. And I'll give you a little, a little tidbit of, we've got plans for the next 4 or 5 years on certain brands of ours and things in the works. I think it's the most exciting time as far as stuff we're working on.
Yeah.
Since Jimmy was putting out a bunch of great stuff, I couldn't feel better about the direction that our distillery and our parent company and everybody working together of where we're going. We've got a lot of really cool whiskey coming.
Yeah.
I think from some of the stuff that I'll be working on, just be looking forward to more old school Jimmy Russell style whiskey, some age stamps, some high proof, some big in your face bourbon. But the thing that I'm probably most excited about, and I know I can talk about this because it's coming, Lord, in what would it be, 2 weeks? Less than that, 10 days. Although none of y'all are allowed to come January 1. I'm hoping I can keep too many people from coming in January. It's too cold here. But we are going to have private barrel picks on the rye side for the first time in a really long time. The very first time we ever did it, I think there was like 10 or less barrels actually sold that year. And then we shut the program down, but it's coming back. I love our private barrel programs. One of my favorite parts of my job. The guy that helps me run the program, Grant Wheeler, he's been running around here this morning. I've already seen him. And it's so fun to get to sell those barrels. But now I'm getting to sell rye, which I like even more than bourbon. So it's going to be 6 and older rye whiskey. And nice. It's going to be a ton of fun.
Yeah. And like you said, it's going to be a different label, right? It's not going to be...
Yeah, so for the first time ever, it won't be attached to an existing label. So the bourbon's always been either Kentucky Spirit or Russell Single Barrel. Mm-hmm. Where this will be a Wild Turkey private label rye. It'll be its own unique thing. A single barrel that will only be available through the private barrel program. And I'm really hoping to showcase... And this stuff helps us. Our private barrels do 2 things. They convince the company and our fans of stuff we can achieve here flavor profile-wise, but it also gives us an indication of what's going to be good down the road. So we first figured out Camp Nelson was going to be what it is 5-6 years ago when Camp Nelson A and F started to show up in the program, and everybody was going nuts for him. And me and Dad looked at each other like, what in the hell is going on out at Camp Nelson? Especially F at that time.
Oh, yeah.
Because every single one of them was insane. You know, an 8, 9, or a 10 out of 10, all of them. And when that happens, you know, that gives us a chance to go to our warehouse team, go to our product development team. Hey, we need to start earmarking some barrels and setting them aside because this stuff's going to be insane in 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And it is. And you can see a lot of that in Russell's 13, in Master's Keep, in Generations, you know.
Single Rick House.
Single Rick House. Single Rick House Camp Nelson F. Maybe the best thing we did this year.
Yeah.
I love that whiskey. And on the rye side, we're looking to do that too. We're looking to do 2 things, which is show off the different flavor profiles we can achieve with our mash bill. Because I think you can see a little bit of that in our current lineup, where 1-on-1 rye, I think, is a little bit more traditional rye. I think the sweetest rye we've got is Rare Breed with a lot of that barrel influence from the older whiskey in there.
Yep.
But we're looking to run the gambit from sharp, dry, and spicy to sweet, almost bourbon-esque, and everywhere in between.
Mm-hmm.
We get a lot of citrus notes on these private barrels, on these single barrels I've been trying. I'm really excited for that.
Yeah.
Rest in peace to Big Dave Pickerel. I remember him coming to our distillery one time and trying some of those rye whiskeys and said all our rye whiskey tasted like orange marmalade. And that sounds pretty good to me. So hopefully we can find some of those barrels.
Yeah.
And then it'll allow us to figure out, because, you know, I'm the quote unquote rye guy. And so hopefully what it'll do is it'll allow me and our team here to find good rye whiskey sitting somewhere in one of these warehouses. There's a lot of good rye whiskey, but hopefully we can find that next Camp Nelson F.
Yeah.
Whether it be here, Tyrone, or over at Camp Nelson, or over at McBrayer, where a bunch of good rye whiskey sitting, and we can start setting them aside. Hey, this stuff's really good, 6, 7 years old.
Yeah.
Why don't we keep this stuff around another 7, 8 years or something?
See
and
what happens with it.
See what happens, yeah.
Yeah. No, and I think like extended age dry whiskey, right? Obviously people are like, oh, rye comes of age so much younger. That is true, right? It can, like that rye is a lot brighter and can round out quicker. But like that extended age, that 10, 12-year-old rye, like I think of Kentucky Owl rye when it first came out, that 12-year-old rye. Like that was nuts.
Yeah.
And so like,
Dixon found some good stuff for early, didn't he?
Yeah. So it's like, if you all can get to that stuff, like people will catch onto that. And the consumer, I think, wants something to balance their palate out to the traditional bourbon too, right? Like that rye gives you more, I'll say it's not as rounded. It can be sharper, right? So it's going to give you maybe a sharp citrus or a like sharp, like baking spices or any of those, that the bourbons can be more rounded out if they're lower in rye content. So I think that's exciting for me, because we were talking about Wild Turkey Rye 101, like Rare Breed Rye or Rare Breed Rye, like all those are great, but like now having singular offshoots of those, that's gonna be pretty cool.
Yeah, it's I mean, we've already got some stuff in the works for some rye whiskey that, you know, might end up in a product, might not, but if you're a fan of aged rye whiskey, definitely keep an eye out.
Yeah.
In the next year or so, of some stuff we might have. We're trying to do some things we've never done before, and I think that's the best part of where the industry's currently at. We talked about the quote unquote bourbon boom, and we're not really seeing a stop worldwide. I mean, there's such a demand for American bourbon and American rye whiskey across the globe now.
Yeah.
That I don't see the boom slowing down. Well, I mean, we've started to see a little bit of consolidation. You saw it in kind of craft beer. There's a bajillion brands.
Yeah.
And then you start to see brands get bought up, or brands, you know, absorb other ones and stuff like that. You might have seen a little bit of that, but as far as the whiskey, it's as big as ever. And what that allows brands like us, distilleries like us, to do, portfolios, and you see it everywhere, is it allows these big legacy distilleries to be a little bit more flexible and agile of what we're able to put out, where most of the time in most industries, the most cool stuff can only really come from the small guys, right?
Yeah.
Because your big person has to put out your daily product every day.
For sure.
Well, for us, the industry's got to the point where we can all do some really cool, really unique stuff. Our consumers are demanding it. They're willing to search, find, you know, pay a premium for this super unique stuff, and that's the most exciting part for us. Is we're able to experiment a little bit more. We're able to play around a little bit more, and you know that's right up mine and Dad's alley.
Yeah,
and then we're not going to get rid of any of the other stuff. You know, we don't want Jimmy to beat us over our head. I still want my Christmas presents.
Yeah,
so I'm not getting rid of or doing anything. I promise you, the 101 or Rare Breed or Spirit or you know any of what I consider the core Jimmy Russell brands.
Yeah,
but we'll keep doing and pushing the envelope and doing more cool things with that same Wild Turkey DNA.
Yeah.
I mean, me and Dad joke around a lot. One of our mantras here is "Don't tell Jimmy." And that, you know, we're trying a lot of stuff. We don't really tell him until it comes into the bottle sometimes, unless his name's gonna be on it. But,
yeah.
And we've got a lot of "Don't tell Jimmy" stuff in the works, and hopefully some of it turns out.
Yeah.
And I think people should be really excited about what we got.
So one of the last question I had for you, because this has become a little bit more prevalent, especially with the last two Master Keeps releases, right, is finishing barrels, right? And it's been done before in Revival. A shout out to Rarebird 101, Dave Jennings, for people who know him. That's his favorite Master Keep. But what's it like playing with that secondary finish, right? Like, because I think you can do a lot of exploration in that. And the rum finish, I think, was really well received this year. So what's it like playing around with that secondary barrel? And do you think there's more of that to come on the horizon that you can continue to play with?
I think that there's always more that we can do with it. I think so far that's kind of been something that Dad's really been attracted to. He started off in the warehouse, and so maturation's always been something that's kind of been up his alley.
Yeah.
I will say that it's definitely, and even though, what was it, Master's Keep 1 had that kind of secondary toasted barrel type of thing going on, that's a little bit different than the Revival and the Voyage that were being put in barrels that had other alcohols in them.
Yep.
I think that it has to be the right type of thing. Revival worked, and I don't know if Campari will ever let Dad do this again because he spent so much money. They kind of gave him a blank check and sent him overseas to buy some Oloroso sherry from Spain, and next thing you know, I think he probably bought the most expensive Oloroso sherry barrels that existed on Earth. They were old, and awesome. You know, he found the ones.
Yeah. And
that product did turn out to be great. And then with the rum, we're lucky enough to be attached to Appleton through Campari.
Yeah.
And when you talk about, you know, masters of their craft, I think in the same way that Jimmy is, in the same way that Dad is, Miss Joy Spence over at Appleton, I mean, she's the first female master blender in rum. She probably has the best palate and flavor just sense of anybody that I've ever heard talk about spirits, anybody I've ever personally been around. I've been around a lot of cool people.
Yeah.
Joy is insane, her ability to taste and smell and just talk about flavors. And so getting to work with somebody like that, super special, and that liquid Appleton is just really damn good.
Yeah. If you're a bourbon drinker, like, just pay attention to rum. Like, aged rum, that's like bourbon drinkers, like, sweet treat.
Absolutely. It's if you like aged dark spirits.
Yeah.
Like if you're a drinker of anything like bourbon or rye, or there's other things out there.
Yeah.
Like check out rum, check out Armagnac, check out cognac. Like there's so many other cool aged spirits.
For sure.
Obviously, you know, bourbon and rye are always gonna be #1 for me, but yeah, Jamaican rum is, it's good.
Oh, yeah.
And it's got a lot of those same kind of funky notes that a lot of vintage whiskey fans go crazy for. It's got those dark fruit, that dark kind of basement funk to it.
Yeah, it does.
And so if we can find somebody else to work with that is as exciting for us as Appleton, yeah. Because that's the key is when we're doing stuff, especially with something like Master's Keep that's going to be a really high-end product, we've got to find something that's going to benefit our whiskey, enhance the whiskey. And, you know, I'm biased. I don't think there's a lot of things that are going to necessarily enhance Wild Turkey to make it always better, maybe different.
For sure.
But, man, Appleton is, I mean, the rum that was in those barrels was older than the bourbon we used. Crazy. I mean, it's hard to find stuff like that. And if we find another thing like that, then, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've seen, Lord, you see everything now from exotic woods to ex-tequila barrels to barrels that had beer in them to, I've seen a new one that had, it was an old Scotch barrel that you're going to, I think all those things are really cool, and I've had examples of most of those things that I really like. Some of them are so new I haven't even tried the products yet, but
Yep.
we're only going to do it if it makes sense for us. And that doesn't mean I'm not going to ask Pablo or the boys over at Starlight to give me their new Amburana. I want a bottle to try it.
Yeah.
But we're only going to do stuff that really works for our whiskey and for our brand.
Yeah. No, for sure. No, and I think what people should hear today is that the direction's not changing. It's just the expansion of the opportunities in front of you all is definitely vast, right? Like to play around and continue to keep the consumer excited is something that they should be looking at this heritage brand like Wild Turkey and say, it's not old, it's not dusty. It's actually a brand that you can be excited about year in, year out. Yeah,
the foundations aren't going anywhere. It's still going to be the same house.
Yep.
I just might want to add a garage or an extra expansion or two on top of the. And we've got a new distillery that'll be built at the end of 2025 here.
Yeah,
that will up our capacity by another 50%, and that's going to open up a lot of cool things for us. So, if you're a fan of Wild Turkey, if you're a fan of Jimmy or Eddie whiskey.
Yeah.
Or you've got to try Generations, or you know me and you know what Bruce whiskey will be. It's the most exciting time to be a turkey fan ever.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of cool things in the works. We got a lot of cool things coming out.
Yep.
Especially keep an eye out for this year. If you're a fan of stuff we've done, especially the higher end stuff we've done the past few years, this is a big year for us.
All right. You heard it here first. You got to pay attention to Wild Turkey, and I'm always going to do that. If you want to know where you can find all that information, just bourbonlens.com. We'll cover all the news. It'll be there, and we'll make sure that you all have access to what's coming from the press release side. But Bruce, I just want to say thank you for jumping on with us today. I know it's Christmas season, and it's a little chilly outside, but I appreciate you driving in and hanging out with us for the last hour. And I look forward to seeing what your whiskey and how you all create whiskey in the future looks like over the next several years, because bourbon and rye whiskey ain't going anywhere. So appreciate you. Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bourbon Lens. Make sure you're connected with Scott and I via social media on Instagram, X, and Facebook. We'd love to connect. And if you're more the professional type, follow us over on LinkedIn. If you want to know more about Bourbon Lens, make sure you're subscribed to our weekly newsletter, The Weekly Pour. For exclusive content and more, check out Patreon. Follow us there at Bourbon Lens. And last but not least, on your favorite podcast listening app, make sure you're subscribed, because every Monday, Scott and I release a podcast, and we would love to have you here listening to the newest features and the newest whiskey news. And until next time, cheers.